The first thing you can see looking at the heart is the thin membrane surrounding it called the pericardium. You can also see the blood vessels on the outside of the heart called the coronary arteries. Once you open up the heart, you can get a better view of the 4 chambers and valves that form it. The heart is held together by small structures called the chordae tendineae that connect the heart valves and the papillary muscles, which are found along the wall of the heart. The ligamentum arteriosum that once aided the calf with blood flow during development as a fetus is now found fixing the aortic and pulmonary trunks to their positions. When blood travels through the body, it first pools into the right atrium of the heart from both the caudal and cranial vena cava. The blood then travels through the tricuspid valve to the right ventricle, where the blood crosses the ventricular septum that separates the right and left sides of the heart, and then exits the heart through the pulmonary trunk to go to the lungs. Blood flow is aided by the semilunar valves that are present in both the pulmonary and aortic trunks. The blood then returns to the left atrium from the lungs and goes through the bicuspid valve to the left ventricle. Blood is then pumped through the aortic trunk that divides into other various vessels like the brachiocephalic trunk that travels to the head of the calf, or blood could continue traveling through the aorta to the celiac artery. The celiac artery goes to the spleen or hepatic artery, which then goes to the liver. If the blood chooses to flow to the spleen, it then exits through the portal vein and then goes through the liver as well. The blood exits the liver via the hepatic vein and then joins with the caudal vena cava to return to the heart to start the process over again.
The masseter originates at the zygomatic arc and inserts at the lateral mandible. Its function is to elevate the mandible and to draw it latered. The pterygoides originates at the pterygoid bone and inserts at the medial mandible. It assists in closing the mandible and in side-to-side grinding movements. The temporalis originates at the temporal fossa and inserts at the coronoid process of the mandible. It serves to elevate the mandible as well as bring the upper and lower teeth together. The origin of the digastricus is caudal to the temporomandibular joint, and the insertion is at the medial mandible. This muscle is responsible for forceful depression of the mandible. The mylohyoides lies between the rami of the mandible, and it lifts the floor of the mouth, as well as the tongue. The orbicularis oculi surrounds the palpebral fissure around the eye. It helps to close the eyelid. The orbicularis oris is the muscle that surrounds the lips. Contraction of this muscle purses the lips. The buccinator forms the wall of the cheek as well as the lateral wall of the oral cavity. It is located between the maxilla and the mandible. The levator labii superioris originates at the maxilla and inserts on the zygomatic bone. It serves to retract the upper lip. The levator nasiobialis originates at the midline of the snout region and inserts on the outer edge of the nostril and edge of the upper lip. Its function is to lift the upper lip and dilate the nostrils. The caninus muscle originates at the canine fossa and inserts at the angle of the mouth. Its purpose is to elevate the corner of the mouth. The zygomaticus originates at the zygomatic arc and inserts at the mouth. Its function is to draw the angle of the mouth posteriorly and superiorly.
M. trapezius is a muscle that originates along the ligamentum nuchae and ligaments of the dorsal midline. It inserts along the scapular spine. M. trapezius is a triangular flat muscle that helps to swing the scapula forward and draw it back. It also links the thoracic limb to the thorax. M. rhomboideus is a muscle that originates on the ligamentum nuchae and ligaments of the dorsal midline. It inserts along the medial side of the scapular cartilage. This muscle is a heavier muscle just underneath the trapezius. It links thoracic limb to the thorax. M. supraspinatus originates on the supraspinous fossa of the scapula and inserts along the greater tubercle of the humerus. This muscle acts chiefly as a stabilizing ligament of the shoulder joint, but also assists in extending the shoulder. This is one of the muscles that shrinks or atrophies in the condition called Sweeney in horses. M. infraspinatus originates along the infraspinous fossa of the scapula. It inserts along the greater tubercle of the humerus. It is a flexor of the shoulder, and it also acts as a strong collateral ligament of the shoulder joint and may abduct, flex, and outwardly rotate the shoulder. This muscle may also shrink or again atrophy in the condition called Sweeney in horses. M. latissimus dorsi originates along the spinous processes of the thoracic and lumbar vertebrae, and it inserts along the medial humerus. It is a flexor of the shoulder. It is a wide triangular muscle that also pulls the thoracic limb caudal or advances the trunk. M. serratus ventralis originates along the transverse processes of the caudal or cervical and cranial thoracic vertebrae, and also originates along the first 8 to 9 ribs, and inserts along the media scapula of the scapular cartilage. This is the largest muscle attaching the thoracic limb to the trunk. It is fan-shaped. The cervical attachments help to lift the neck. The cervical portion also allows for rotation of the distal part of the scapula. The thoracic portion rotates the scapula forward. M. biceps brachii originates along the supraglenoid tubercle of the scapula and inserts along the cranial aspect of the proximal radius and ulna. It is a flexor of the elbow. It also holds the shoulder joint in a position and may extend it to some point. M. triceps brachii originate along the caudal border of the scapula in the proximal humerus. It inserts along the olecranon process of the ulna. There are 3 heads: the long head, which originates at the caudal border of the scapula, and the lateral and caudal heads, which originate at the humerus. The whole muscle is involved in the elbow extension. However, the long head portion is also involved in shoulder flexion. The M. subscapularis originates on the medial side of the subscapular fossa and inserts along the medial humerus. It stabilizes the shoulder on the medial side of the scapula. M. pectoralis superficialis originates on the sternum and cranial costal cartilages. It inserts along the medial humerus and fascia forearm. It is a strong abductor of the forelimb. M. pectoralis profundus is also called the deep pectoral muscle and is not seen in the picture because it is covered by the pectoralis superficialis. However, it originates on the cranial sternum, on the ribs, and on the abdominal fascia. It inserts along the craniomedial humerus. It is a strong abductor of the forelimb and is also important in weight bearing. It helps in advancing the trunk when limb is fixed on the ground. M. gluteus medius originates on the wing of the ilium in the tubercocci, the sacrum, and the sacrosciatic ligament. It inserts along the greater trochanter of the femur. This muscle is very important for extension of the hip. M. biceps femoris originates along the sacrum, the sacrosciatic ligament, and the ischial tuber. It inserts along the patellar ligament, the patella, and the calcaneal tuber. It is an extender of the hip and part of the group of muscles that makes up the hamstring, the most lateral of the caudal muscles of the thigh. In ruminants, this muscle is blended with the superficial gluteal muscle and is also called the M. gluteal biceps. M. semimembranosus originates along the caudal vertebrae, the sacrosciatic ligament, and the ischial tuber. It inserts along the medial distal femur and the medial proximal tibia. It is an extender of the hip. It makes up a part of the hamstring muscles, being the most medial part of that group. M. semitendinosus originates along the sacrum, the caudal vertebrae, the sacrosciatic ligament, and the ischial tuber. It inserts along the cranial tibia and the calcaneal tuber. It is an extender of the hip, makes up the middlemost muscle of the group of hamstring muscles. The M. tensor fascia lata originates along the tuber coccyx and inserts along the fascia lata. It is key for the flexion of the hip and extension of the stifle. M. gracilis originates along the pelvic symphysis and inserts along the medial aspect of the proximal tibia. It is important for adduction of the pelvic limb. It is the most medial muscle extending from the symphysis of the pelvis to the tibia. M. adductor originates along the ventral pelvis and inserts along the medial femur. It is a strong adductor, but may also help in extending the hip. It is the largest muscle on the medial side of the thigh. M. quadriceps femoris originate along the proximal femur and the body of the ilium, and inserts along the patella. The outward is important for the outward rotation of the hip and hip extension. It is a primary extensor of the stifle. It is made up of 4 heads with distinguishable bellies: the M. rectus femoris, M. vastus medialis, M. vastus intermedius, and M. vastus lateralis. The longest head, M. rectus femoris, also flexes the hip and originates at the ilium. M. vastus medialis, M. vastus intermedius, and M. vastus lateralis all originate at the shaft of the femur. All muscle heads insert at the patella. M. gastrocnemius originates at the caudal aspect of the femoral condyles and inserts along the tuber calcanei. Major extender of the hock and will flex the stifle. The tendons of this muscle make up the bulk of the common calcanean tendon. M. iliopsoas originates on the ventral aspect of the lumbar vertebrae in the ilium and sacrum. It inserts along the lesser trochanter of the femur. It is important for flexion of the hip and made up of 2 muscles, the M. iliacus and the M. psoas major. M. iliacus originates on the ventral surface of the wing on the ilium. M. psoas major originates from the ventral surface of the transverse process. It is superficial and lies under the area which the gluteus medius muscle is located. M. rectus abdominis originates along the costal cartilage and sternum and inserts on the pubis via the prepubic tendon. It's difficult to see in this picture, but the rectus abdominis forms the muscle floor of the abdomen and divided by a series of tendinous intersections. M. transversus abdominis originate deep in the thoracolumbar fascia and insert on the linea alba. It is the deepest abdominal muscle, directed in a perpendicular plane to the long axis of the body to insert at the linea alba. M. obliquus externus abdominis originate at the last few ribs in thoracolumbar fascia and insert at the linea alba. This is a superficial muscle. The fibers lie obliquely ventrad and caudad and continues to make up the aponeurosis and the inguinal ligament caudally. M. obliquus internus abdominis originate at the tuber coccyx and transverse processes of the lumbar and insert at the linea alba. These are immediately deep to the external abdominal oblique muscle, which makes it hard to see in this picture, but the fibers pass obliquely ventrad and craniad. It makes up the aponeurosis in the deep inguinal ring and the M. cremaster muscle in the males.
The main gland most predominant in the system is the pituitary gland, which primarily produces hormones to regulate the body. The hypothalamus is also located in the brain and stimulates the pituitary gland to release most of its hormones and also inhibits the production of others. The last of the glands that is found in the brain is the pineal gland. This gland controls the biologic clock of the calf by producing and releasing melatonin. Outside of the brain, we have the thyroid, located in the neck and around the trachea. The thyroid is mainly responsible for the production and secretion of calcitonin that controls calcium levels in the body. Attached to the thyroid, there is also the parathyroid that produces other hormones to help control calcium levels as well. The thymus is located above the heart and between the two lungs. The thymus is larger in the calf than it would appear in an adult because its secretions regulate the production and maturation of lymphocytes for the immune system and regresses as the calf's immunity builds up. The adrenal glands located above the kidneys secrete glucocorticoids that are responsible for the calf's metabolism. The other hormones are then released by the pancreas to control the metabolism as well. The final major gland of the endocrine system are the testes that produce sex hormones for sperm production and sexual characteristics during puberty. The kidneys in the calf consist of multiple lobes that consist of the outermost layer called the cortex, which is where the majority of the nephrons reside, that filter out contents of the blood. The medulla, which is the center region of the lobe, is where the blood travels to and from the cortex before and after going through the nephrons. The urine that filters out from the blood flows from the medulla to the minor calyx and then to the major calyx. These then lead to a larger area called the renal pyramid, which then goes into the renal pelvis, where urine then leaves through the ureters that descend to the bladder, where the urine is stored until it is expelled through the urethra to exit the body.
The male reproductive tract of a bovine consists of a fibroelastic penis, which means it's firm when not erect, a sigmoid flexure, which extends to push the penis out through the prepuce during erection, and the accessory sex glands, which produce seminal fluid that are mixed with the sperm that provide proteins and lipids to protect sperm in the female reproductive tract, which is also referred to as semen. The prepudal diverticulum accumulates secretion of accessory glands, urine, dead cells to create an odor. Vesicular glands are associated with a general fold which merges with the ductus deferens in a region called the ipsilateral ductus deferens that creates the ejaculatory duct, which then empties into the urethra. The bulbourethral glands are paired glands cranial to the ischial arch and behind the other accessory glands, also are referred to the Cowper's gland. The ampullae is well developed and mature bull and contributes to the volume of semen produced. A bull produces less than 5 milliliters of semen but has 3 billion sperm per milliliter. The prostate surrounds the urethra and can cause problems in older bulls because of prostate enlargement, and it can constrict the urethra and cause problems passing urine. It also produces an alkaline secretion that gives semen odor. The sperm and testosterone are made in the testes and are stored in the epididymis. This is where the sperm gains its motility and matures before it goes through the ductus or vas deferens. The ductus deferens delivers sperm from the epididymis to the urethra, and it also has access to the accessory sex glands, and it joins the urethra at the ampullae. The gubernaculum and peritoneum are both muscles covering the testes and make up the scrotum. The spermatic cord contains blood vessels, nerves, lymphatics, and the ductus deferens that suspends the testes within the scrotum. The tunic dartos is the fibroelastic tissue with smooth muscle that allows the scrotal sac to constrict or relax. It also forms the scrotal septum that separates the two testes and the scrotum in their own compartments. The testicle artery provides blood to the testes and is found within the pampiniform plexus, which is a network that allows the blood to cool so it is at a lower temperature before it enters the scrotum. The cremaster muscle comes from the internal abdominal oblique and helps the spermatic cord as well as the tunic dartos and the testicle artery. The contraction of this muscle brings the testes closer to the body wall and is also known as the temperature regulator.
There are two sections to the brain, the cerebrum and the cerebellum. The cerebrum can be identified by the ridges and furrows that it contains. The cerebrum is responsible for such things as movement, sensory processing, the olfactory system, language and communication, and learning and memory. The second part, the cerebellum, is smaller in size. It is critical to movements and muscle activity. The brainstem provides motor and sensory innervation and provides the attachment of the brain to the body. The meninges are coverings of the brain and the spinal cord. The layers, from deep to superficial, are the pia mater, the arachnoid, and the dura. The spinal cord is another integral part of the nervous system. The central canal is in the middle, and it is responsible for continuing the ventricular system of the brain to the rest of the body. The dorsal, lateral, and ventral funiculi are the sections of the white matter. The dorsal and ventral horns are the gray matter. The peripheral nervous system includes the nerves and ganglia outside the central nervous system. They are there to convey sensory information to the brain and spinal cord and to produce movement of muscle and secretions from glands via its motor nerves. It consists of the brachial plexus and the lumbosacral plexus. The brachial plexus derives from the last 3 cervical and the first 1 or 2 thoracic nerves. The lumbosacral plexus is made up of the ventral branches of the last few lumbar and first 2 or 3 sacral nerves.
The oral portion, or the mouth, is defined by the lips, which are covered by a haired skin that changes to a mucous membrane at the mucocutaneous junction. There are salivary glands present that secrete saliva with the enzyme amylase to break down sugars. The teeth play an important role in mastication, but a bovine only has incisors on the bottom dental arcade. At the top dental arcade, a bovine has a keratinized dental pad. The tongue consists of a mass of muscle that is covered by a mucous membrane. The apex is the rostral end, the body is the meaty part, and the root, which is adjacent to the pharynx. The tongue is covered by papillae, which include the filiform, fungiform, valate, and especially the conical papillae in the bovine. A ruminant also has a prominent dorsal bulge on the tongue called the dorsus lingua that is covered by conical papillae. The pharynx and the epiglottis direct food from the mouth to the esophagus. The esophagus is a muscular tube that extends from the pharynx all the way to the caudal end of the diaphragm. It is kept closed by the M. cricopharyngeus sphincter near the pharynx. The esophagus is made up of muscles that allow boluses of food to move through the system through the action of peristalsis. The sulcus rumino-reticularis, or the esophageal groove, is a structure in young ruminants that takes food and bypasses the rumen, because the rumen has yet to develop. It consists of molecular folds from the reticularum that come together. The rumen is not yet developed in a calf. It is the first compartment of the stomach of a ruminant animal. It is lined with stratified squamous epithelium and allows food to be subjected to microorganisms that break down the food. The cardia is the opening of the esophagus into the stomach. The rumen is subdivided by a muscular compartment called pillars that divide the rumen into dorsal and ventral sacs. The reticulum is the most cranial part of the forestomach. The mucosa is thrown into intersecting ridges that make the stomach look like a honeycomb. The reticulum is important in keeping sharp objects that the animal has eaten from piercing the heart. The omasum is another part of the stomach that is filled with a muscular laminae that lie in sheets so that it looks like a book. The membrane covering the laminae is studded with short papillae, and the laminae each has 3 layers of muscle. The abomasum is also called the true stomach and is the first glandular portion of the ruminant. The cardiac glands secrete a mucus into the stomach. The fundic glands, or gastric glands, secrete hydrochloric acid into the gastric pits. The pylorus is a very strong sphincter that regulates the outflow of the stomach, and in a ruminant, the pyloric region has a muscular fatty enlargement that is called the torus pyloricus. The duodenum is the first of the 3 divisions of the small intestine. It is attached to the body wall by the mesentery mesoduodenum. The duodenum receives ducts from the pylorus, but also from the liver and the pancreas. The pancreas secretes sodium bicarbonate and other digestive enzymes into the duodenum. Bovines do not have a main pancreatic duct, but they have an accessory pancreatic duct called the duct of Santorini. The liver makes bile, a salt that helps in the breakdown of lipids that is stored in the gallbladder. The hepatic ducts that join the cystic duct of the gallbladder make up the common bile duct that enters the bile into the duodenum. The transition between the duodenum and the duodenum is marked by an increase in the length of supporting mesentery. The lymph nodes at the mucosal-submucosal junction are also more numerous. The ileum is the last part of the small intestine. There is a fold between the duodenum and the cecum that is called the ileocecal fold. The ileal epithelium also feature many mucus cells and are abundant in lymph nodes. The cecum is the first part of the large intestine. The blind end of the cecum projects caudal into the pelvic inlet. The cecum is continuous with the colon. The colon is made up of a series of loops that make up the proximal, spiral, distal, and transverse loops, and that lead into the descending colon, which leads into the rectum. The rectum has an external and sphincter of striated muscle and an internal anal sphincter of smooth muscle to end the digestive tract. Distension of the rectum stimulates defecation.
The respiratory tract starts out in the nasal cavity. The nasal cavity is lined with conchae that help warm and humidify the air as it flows through. Then it goes to the pharynx, which separates the esophagus from the trachea. Air then goes to the larynx, which is at the entrance of the trachea and is the organ of phonation and vocalization. The larynx, the epiglottic cartilage or epiglottis, thyroid cartilage, cricoid cartilage, and arytenoid cartilage. The trachea extends from the larynx to the bronchi. It is formed by tracheal cartilages, which allow it to be flexible. The trachea extends as far as the base of the heart, and then it divides into two principal bronchi, one for each lung. Cows also have tracheal bronchus, which supply the cranial lobe of the right lung. The brachial branches extend all the way to the alveoli, and the alveoli contains capillaries that contain deoxygenated blood. Carbon dioxide is exchanged for oxygen, making the blood newly oxygenated, and the carbon dioxide is pushed from the alveoli to the bronchioles and bronchi up through the trachea and exhaled outwards. The diaphragm also helps with the actions of inhaling and exhaling. The lungs are surrounded by pleura, and the junction of the two pleural sacs is called the mediastinum. Cows have mediastinum that are extremely thick and form cavities between the left and right lung. This way, if one lung is collapsed, the animal can still function with the other lung.
I am cow, hear me moo. I weigh twice as much as you, and I look good on the barbecue. Yogurt, curd, cream, cheese, and butters made from liquid from my udders. I am cow, hear me moo. I am cow, eating grass, methane gas comes out my ass and out my muzzle when I belch. Oh, the ozone layer is thinner from the outcome of my dinner. I am cow, I've got gas. I am cow, here I stand, far and wide upon this land, and I am living everywhere. From BC to Newfoundland, you can squeeze my teats by hand. I am cow,